take it from there. Cool. So let me just tell you quickly about Collab for the new folks who are in the event and you're just sort of like meeting us for the first time. So essentially what we're an online school that helps provide real-world experience for career transitioners who are trying to develop their skills in product management, product design, software engineering. What we do is that we bring you together to form teams and build products in 8 weeks so you can gain real-world experience, showcase that to potential employers and get hired. So we've trained over 500 people and 95% of our graduates always tell us that they feel a lot more confident because they've been able to work in an agile team, build real products and get all the great experience that they can showcase. And we also have about an 85% career advancement rate where lots of people land jobs and promotions in top tech companies and startups across the world. So it's amazing, impactful stuff that we're doing. And if you'd like to learn more about Collab, feel free to stick around and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So now we can sort of like get started with the event. And first thing first, I'd like to pass it on to you, Sam, to just quickly introduce yourself before we then sort of like go into the Q&A portion of the event. So over to you, Sam.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, not much to introduce, just Sam Legge. I've been working in product for about 8 years now, working in technology business for 10 plus years now, graduate school doing engineering, went directly into working in tech, based mostly out of the Waterloo, Ontario area, for those of you who know where that is. And yeah, been really excited to follow around with Sifumi and the team at Collab and their journey and doing what they're doing. So super supportive of what they're trying to accomplish. So and definitely happy to be here.
Cool, awesome. And thank you so much for joining us today. You have like a wealth of knowledge to share. I always learn from you through every interaction that we have. So I'm very excited to be asking you more questions and learning more about what you do. So let's start with like an easy question. I know a lot of folks are in here also trying to break into product management for the very first time. Could you just quickly walk over sort of like your experience and how you broke into product for the very first time?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so my experience breaking into product is probably a little different than a lot of people's today, just because it was so long ago in the technology world's scheme of things. Back when I was looking at getting into product management wasn't as a defined role as it is today in most modern technology companies. But essentially how I got into it is, graduating from university as an engineer, realized pretty quickly that I was not the best engineer. I was able to get through school, but I wasn't really someone who was super excited to sit down every day and do engineering work specifically, but I loved working with engineers, loved solving problems. So through the process of building and working on my own business, really realized that where I loved to work and really enjoyed spending time was working alongside engineers and other creative people like designers. And a little bit more focus on the customer and the problems that we need to solve, and shaping that for the work for the team or the company that I was working on. So that kind of naturally grew into me as a product manager. And then eventually, through some personal relationships I had in the time in Kitchener-Waterloo area, there's a team or a company called Untitled Labs, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, which grew into a company called North, which was then 2 years ago acquired by Google, which is why I'm at Google now. So that was, that's about a 7.5, almost 8 year time horizon from when I started as an official product manager at Thalmic way back in the day to being a product manager at Google right now.
Cool, awesome. So now let's just like go into what you do at Google. What is it like being a senior product manager working on augmented reality products like AR products? So what's that like? Could you just tell us more about the stuff that you do?
Yeah, I mean, this is something maybe we can get into a little bit more detail later on, but I think, product management at different levels of businesses is very different. Product management at the small company scale, or basically being a CEO, is like, something maybe around what you work as right now in your world, for me, or is very different from like a high growth business like Thalmic and North at the time that they were going through the heavy growth phase, to where I am today at Google, which is like obviously an extremely established, huge, massive business of like 150,000 full-time employees. So if I were to speak to like where we are today or where I'm today and like how that role works, I think generally speaking, product managers at Google are very much like the glue of the small collaborative product teams who build product. So they are driving things like the vision, driving things like the roadmap, working with all the cross-functional partners, people like the research team, the design team, maybe marketing, maybe legal, maybe business development, depending on the role in the specific product you're working on. And really making sure that it's all coming together cohesively to solve the right problem or the specific problem that you're trying to solve for customers. So at Google, compared to other businesses, that role is very defined in the sense that you are like very keenly focused on solving the right problem, working with your partners to make sure you're solving the right problem. As you kind of go down into the like smaller businesses and you scale down back to like something like North and Thalmic or down to like your own business or smaller business like yourself, like that scope of what you do as a product manager tends to grow, as do many roles, but like product management I find is definitely one that like becomes very much a jack of all trades. In certain places you have to play a little bit of an engineer, a little bit of a designer, a little bit of a researcher, just to fill the gaps where it needs to be, and also play in some cases leaders in roles that you typically wouldn't play a leadership role in at Google, let's say. So that's kind of like how I see product management at Google and kind of like down the ladder of business size.
All right, cool, awesome. And then, I don't know if there's anything, I guess we can get into that like in a second before we go into the AR products, but if you then take it back from when you were at Google working on Atomic and North, could you just talk to us about, those kinds of products and what it means to build products for very specific use cases, or in this case, like products for the future, as we've coined this event?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I'm the expert here. Let's start with that, I guess. You can look at my track record of the products that we worked on. Like we've definitely been, and I have been personally working on a lot of really future-looking products. I'd say like I've yet to really nail a future product that has now become the present and really relevant in the present. So let's take my advice with a grain of salt. But assuming that all my years of experience have added up to learning something, I think that the biggest thing that I would take away from thinking about what makes something successful, like looking into the future and trying to kind of pull it into the present, is really this idea that like you need to focus on a problem that exists today. This is very cliche, but problem that exists today, and just and focus on solving it better, instead of trying to do both things at the same time. What I mean by that is like you shouldn't be trying to do something better while also trying to solve a new problem. That's often kind of like what a lot of these newer the businesses that are like very focused on the future is. They're predicting a need that's going to happen in a couple of years down the road, and they're trying to solve that need today. And you're dealing with like a really hard problem there because you're both trying to educate the user or the customer about what the problem is and why they should care about it, while also introducing them to something new that they've never seen before. That's a really, really hard problem to solve. And the ones that people are typically more successful are the ones that avoid that problem and go straight to like, what's the need today? What's the problem today? And how can I address that with like newer technology, or just do it in a different and more optimized way?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a great perspective. So between Thalmic and North, because I want to like give the audience context as to like those products, which one would you like to dive into in terms of like what the use case was, what the product did, and sort of like the experience there?
It's probably easier for us to go into the North stuff if that's okay with the group.
Yeah, for sure. So could you give people context as to like what the North focals were, what were you trying to accomplish, and just tell us about that, and then we'll follow up from there. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the North team, based out of Kitchener-Waterloo, they were a team that had previously worked on a product called the Myo, which was essentially a wristband or armband, I should say, that kind of went on your upper forearm, and it measured the electrical signals being sent through your forearm to your fingers, essentially, and then use that to like guide things like drones, control TVs, like skip to the next episode, control the volume, that kind of thing. So it was really like an experimental development toy to see if there was something that was like interesting in how people interface with technology, new and something that they could do. What ended up happening during that process is they were developing the Myo armband for Google Glass project, which was roughly 2012, 2013 timeline. And through that process, they realized that like the Google Glass was a really interesting product, but in their opinion, executed very poorly from like a, this makes everyone who wears it look like a dork. So they're like, well, can we make something that looks better than this thing? It shouldn't be that hard, right? So that's kind of what started the path of working on smart glasses at North. And so we kind of went from there through to shipping what we called the product Focals V1, which is essentially like a smart glasses, a stylish pair of smart glasses that you were able to use for simple things like getting messages from friends, replying to those messages, get navigation instructions, tell the time, get general notifications, like really, really basic things. There's a couple of games on there. There's a couple like, productivity focused things like lists and to-dos and all that kind of stuff. But that was generally like where the experience landed for Focals V1.
Cool. That's like an interesting, very, very interesting product. I remember when it came out the very first time and I saw it, I was very intrigued by, like, it just looked like regular glasses, but then you could do all these amazing things. So could you just tell us, like, as a product manager, because I know you're one of the product leads on that product, what are the processes you actually take when you're tackling some of the challenges that come with building products in such a new space, in such an innovative space?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to speak about this in like the super concrete terms, but I'll try to do my best here. I think like the biggest thing that you kind of struggle with as like whether it's an entrepreneur or a product manager working in a business like this, working on something like this novel or new, is you're really trying to understand like what is the sandbox that you're playing in from a product development perspective, and guiding the team into that sandbox. And I guess the easier way to maybe understand that is like, when you have this idea of like, hey, like we want to build smart glasses that are fashionable, or as fashionable as they can possibly be. You need a lot more guidance to the team to say like, okay, well, what do these smart glasses do? Like, what do they need to accomplish? Like, how long do they need to last? Battery wise, like how fast do they need to be able to charge? So working over time and getting more and more clarity for your team on those specific problems is like a really, really hard problem. Because there's always constant, changes. There's always constant disruptions. There's things you learn that change your plan. So as a leader or product manager in these types of roles, as much as possible, like I have learned, just when you can, creating clarity for your team. So creating a clear idea of like what we need to accomplish and what's going to be success at the end of the day. But then also communicating that through some sort of framework that's very flexible, and allowing them to understand the flexibility of that framework, so that you can say like, hey, like, we're going to work on this for a month. I can't tell you exactly what the state of everything's going to be at the end of the month, but we'll assess at the end of the month where we are, and we might need to pivot, might need to change depending on how things go. So it's really just like acknowledging uncertainty, because these projects are like highly uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty that comes with it. And then, but within that uncertainty, creating clarity for like immediate things in front of the team as much as possible. That's kind of how like my like mental model, I'd say, for like, working with my team and doing the best that we can with everything going on around us.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like, addressing uncertainty, and when you're working with other people and being very open and transparent about something like that, what is it like motivating a team when there's so much uncertainty? Could you tell us what that's like? And as a PM, what do you use to navigate that? I know you mentioned just being honest and forthcoming and driving clarity, but it's sometimes difficult when you don't know what's going to happen if you spend 1 month working on something and it doesn't actually pan out. So anything that you can share on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the exercises that I've gone through personally that I definitely encourage everyone else to do as well, if you have a chance, is like to spend some time trying to understand your personal values and what drives you, and who you want to come across as to the people that you work with. I think the reason why this is like super important, especially in environments like startups, is having a clear definition of how you want to relate to everyone around you as a leader. And if, for those of you who are building products, like, you're all leaders in your own right, whether you're leading a team or working within a team. Like everyone has a chance to be a leader, and everyone should think of themselves as a leader. And when it comes down to that, like I think when with uncertainty and ever-changing timelines or ever-changing requirements, my take or how I like to express what you're asking, Sufunmi, is just like being as straightforward as possible about what is the uncertainty, and let people know what I don't know. And then when I do know something that has changed or I learn something that is new, again, being straightforward and honest with that as quickly as possible. I think the piece that I just layer on top of that, just to make sure that this is understood, is like that is obviously easy at face value, but hard in practice. And the reason why it's hard in practice is because it takes a lot of time to communicate this stuff really well. And oftentimes I find like in businesses where you're working on stuff that's super exciting, working on the future, so quote unquote, being really good and taking the time to communicate to everyone around you about like what mistakes we've made or what we don't know, and having the gumption to actually state those things openly and honestly is it seems obvious, but it's not so obvious when you're in the midst of it. So yeah, I mean, I think just being honest with your team as much as possible, and making sure that you're communicating that honesty that you're trying to convey as well as possible.
Yeah, it sounds so easy, but also hard at the same time. Because if you think about being very open and as a PM needing to have all the answers, you're really telling your team, hey, you don't know. How do you even overcome situations like that when you really hit a roadblock or you're trying to accomplish something on the roadmap and it's like a must-have and you're experiencing challenges? What have you done in the past to overcome that? Or is it just like end of story, have to pivot, have to do something else? I'm curious.
Yeah. So one thing that I think, again, going back to a little bit of like the who you are and how you want to be perceived, what I've learned over my career so far is a little bit humbling from the perspective of, I think you come into the room as a product manager or as a leader building products, assuming that people think you need to know all the answers. My impression up until now and what I've really started to lean into is, my job isn't to actually know everything, and my job isn't to know what way to go next. My job is to pull everyone together and figure that out together and adjudicate, negotiate, like come to some sort of consensus. Consensus could be full consensus, or it could be like, I understand where you're from, but we're going to go this way. Like, you shouldn't be designing product by consensus, but making sure people are heard, at least at a minimum. Like that's really the value of a great leader and a great product manager, is being able to do that, but do it quickly, effectively, and then again, communicate what the next step is, right, based on that conversation. And that could be several conversations, it could be one conversation. It's hard to know. I think some of the biggest growth moments as a product manager in my career have been moments where no one knew what the answer was, like what to do next. And I thought I should just make it up on the spot, right? It was my job to make it up because I'm the product manager. And I can like think up the top of my head, there's a couple examples of me doing that. And typically that doesn't go well because, as soon as you step out of that meeting room, you're probably going to be proven wrong. So yeah, taking the time, talking to your team, leaning on their expertise, pulling everyone together, and then like getting that buy-in to move forward together, however risky that next step is.
Yeah, that's remarkable, and thanks for sharing. I think a lot of product management is really effective communication, as you've expressed like really deeply here. Are there any other product management tips or processes or things that you've tried and you've learned to help you in those situations, whether that's overcoming a challenge or when you're working on a specific use case for a very future quote unquote product and trying to overcome some of that? Any other product management tips, frameworks, or strategies that you've seen really work beyond the communication that you found to be effective?
Yeah, one thing that I've learned to appreciate in the last, I'd say, a couple of years, actually, later in my career, is I'm in my previous life as an engineer, I was very interested in doing like academic research. That was kind of actually the path that I thought I was on for a while, was to become a professor essentially. And so I really love research at its core. I think I was kind of became disfranchised by what academic research is in practice at these academic institutions, very slow and very focused on what, in my opinion, what are the wrong things. That being said, fast forward to where we are today, I've learned to really like go back and think thoroughly about how I do research in my whatever team I'm working on. And that could be like small little tiny things, the research, like little tests with people, or larger scale like user research studies that take, let's say, a month to accomplish and get right. I think being a product manager is like, it's again going back to the top of the conversation, like our job is to really understand what problems need to be solved. But it also is really important to know what questions to ask in order to understand what problems need to be solved. And a lot of product managers, including myself, tend to kind of dismiss research as something that can just be done in order to like validate, our opinions. But it's so much more than that. And then when you put more time and understanding into like how to use user research super well, I definitely see like the massive amount of benefit. We skip forward 6 months in time just based on research insights that if we had just stumbled our way, it would have taken us maybe 6 months or never gotten the same solution. So like that's something I'd say, like if you wanted to upgrade your skill set or add something to your toolkit, is like spending some time with user researchers and like understanding how they work, understanding how good user research works. Look at examples of great user research, which are typically hard to find because a lot of that is like kept pretty close to the chest for a lot of these companies. But if you can find good examples of good user research, and get someone to explain to you like the process that they went through to like build that and understand it and share the insights, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I'll just mention is this is something that I separately do with a bunch of startups that are inside of the Google for Startup Accelerator program. But it's essentially talking about reframing how product teams work on road mapping and executing on that roadmap. The primary inspiration there is this book called Shape Up. It's an online resource you can look up right now. Just Google Shape Up. It's free. You can read through it in like a Saturday morning with a tall cup of coffee. And really, it basically starts to refute a lot of existing things that are built into how Agile works as a methodology in a really healthy way, I think, especially for companies or bit teams that are trying to ship a lot of product to learn kind of where they need to be or what their customers need from their product. It's a super good methodology, essentially just letting you to like be more ruthless with how you prioritize, but also making sure that the emphasis is on like making clarity for your teams so that they can actually be really good at executing when they go into a sprint. Just like it's just a little bit of like an inspirational document that I find that has really helped shape how I think about product development and making the best out of the limited time every team has.
Cool, awesome. And it's called Shape Up. But who is the author? Or?
It's the team behind Basecamp. I can just type it in the chat. It's pretty. You can. I think it's pretty much the first result on Google if you search it. But yeah, Basecamp, the task management software, that team basically wrote that work. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Matt. And I think to your point regarding like user research, it's not very common for a lot of companies to have user researchers. It's actually, I find that a lot of PMs early on in their career, and even like in well-established companies, don't have that resource to be able to leverage. So for folks who don't have the luxury to work with a user researcher, what do you think PMs can do differently in their approach to user research that is beyond just, hey, talk to 5 customers and just throw in a survey in there, that's actually deep and focused on customer needs?
Yeah, I think what I would just say in general is like, if you don't have a user researcher on staff or on your team, go out and find one and learn as much as you can from them, just like an hour a week, let's say, grab some time with them or buy them a coffee or whatever it takes, sit down with them and help them get them to help you understand how to use user research. I would argue that like I know like Silicon Valley and a lot of the heroes from that preach this idea of like user test, like A/B test, like whatever it takes, like throw it at a bunch of users, see what they think. I think that's generally true from a perspective of like get it in front of users as much as you can. But I'd say that the lackadaisical approach of doing that can actually often be more hurtful or harmful than just spending a little bit more time trying to understand exactly what you need to know and making sure that you're asking it in the right way. It's going to give you actually some sort of meaningful signal. The reason for that is like you can basically build any study to validate any point that you have in any business that you want. Like I could sit down with you right now and say, what opinion do you have about where Colab should go? And I could build you a study to confirm that opinion and get that study filled out by 5 people, right? So just trying to figure out ways to like remove your bias from the questions, remove your bias from what is the answers that you're trying to find. And then also using the right research methods, because there's a bunch of them and there's like, you know, a million of them out there, right? So yeah, I'm just thinking through all the components. Just don't think that the first thing that comes to your mind and how you want to do research is the right way to do it. And I'd say like, just take a step back and say like, do we need this right now? Or can I take like a day more to like figure out if this is the right thing to do? Because like I said, it can definitely be, it can steer you in the wrong direction, which is what user research is not supposed to be doing, right?
Awesome, great. Thank you so much for that. So now let's move on to like, what you're currently working at Google. Could you tell us like a little bit more about, I know like Google has a ton of different like AR products. So what are the ones that you're working on specifically, or the ones that you're excited about that you can share?
The ones that I'm personally working on and excited about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't actually share too much from what I'm working at Google. There was a recent announcement we had at the last I/O event, which was related from the AR team. So if you want to take a look at that, essentially some research that we conducted around smart glasses that helps people translate foreign languages into written word in front of them. So you can go take a look at it. It was pretty widely shared. Beyond that, I can't really share much. I think the one thing I could just generally say though is like the team is thinking through like how to build, and this is kind of the team I'm generally working on, is like how to build an interface for the next computing platform, which in many people's prediction is going to be something augmented reality like, right? What form factor or what exact computing platform actually delivers that is, obviously a super big question still to be solved. But I find it super interesting to be working on like not only just the form factors and the different types of technologies, but actually, what is the interface that makes sense for augmented reality, whether it's on a phone or it's through some other device. So that's kind of where I love to play.
Cool, awesome. So it's also it's fascinating that you're in a space where there is no truth for what's going to actually work, what's not going to work. So there's a ton of learning that you're doing. So could you share ways you or other PMs really think differently about creating those products that, hopefully promise to make like our lives better or easier or much more effective for the future? And how do you think about, like you said, form factor could be different. And then how do you make sure you're delivering value? And I think that ties into some of the things you've said earlier about solving the problems today instead of trying to do too much to predict the future of 5-10 years from now.
Yeah, I think honestly it just comes back to that. I think the more that I reflect on my past career and whether it's North or Ophthalmic or even my own business that I was working on, I think the more that you try to think you can get ahead of your users and predict the future for what they might want versus just focusing on what they do want today, the more that you get yourself into a little bit more of into a pickle, right? I think there's obviously certain companies that are outliers there, like there are businesses who are keenly just advanced technology companies who are working on just technology for the sake of technology. But if you look at those companies' business models, they're typically very different from like the general technology business model, right? So unless you're building that, which is cool, you can do that. You just have to think about it very differently than if you were going to say like try to build a product to sell to businesses or to consumers. It's just different, and frankly, there's not a lot of overlap between the two businesses typically. So yeah, just going back to the key point there, I think like just making sure that you are trying to solve today's problems with tomorrow's technology is maybe a way to look at it, versus tomorrow's problems with tomorrow's technology.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much for like breaking that down and just simplifying it. Solve today's problems with tomorrow's technology instead of trying to think about tomorrow's problems or trying to solve problems that don't even exist yet. So another thing that we've talked about in the past is like when you're building products, even for like future technology or even with AR, there's like a lot of like important details. Like even think about like the focals. You have like a very small area that you need to look at to be able to get the information. What do you do? Is there a way you can train yourself or a particular way of thinking to ensure that you don't miss those important details when creating those products? Because attention to detail is very important as a product manager, but I feel like you have to even take a level further in being very, very focused on all the attention on all the different sides of the products they're working on. So could you talk to us about how do you maintain that practice?
Yeah, totally. I actually have to give a shout out. Jose is in the room here with us. He's a colleague of mine from North Talmud days. So, he might actually be one to even ask this question to and see what he thinks. But hey, Jose, good to see you.
Hi, Jose.
I think one of the biggest things that if I were to reflect on my time at North and Talmud is, how do you get simplicity as much as possible into the product? These products are like often like very complex from the outset. And as like product experience teams, so like teams that are actually responsible for like crafting what the user is going to experience when they use the product, driving as much simplicity into those decisions in your daily decision making as much as possible is super, super important. I think that's like honestly like the most important thing I could say from like a experience perspective. On top of that too, like just something that I've leaned into a lot, and it's different for everyone in their career as a product manager. So take it for what it's worth. But the classic mantra is that like every product manager tends to have like two skill sets or one skill set that they really lean into. Some people who come from an engineering world, that's like their technical background. Some people who come from business world, it's the business background. So understanding what that is important. But one thing that I see very infrequently, just as like something to keep in mind for yourself, is product managers who have a really keen sense for a good user experience and pay attention to like the design of the product. It's not something that actually exists as commonly as I would have thought previously. So if you're looking at ways to differentiate yourself as a product manager, it's trying to get into that and really understand how to make a great user experience. And when you're thinking about future products, user experience is really what's going to seal the deal, right? Like if you can actually take something like that's tomorrow's technology, like think about a Tesla car, for example, the classic current example, right? That car is no different from any other car beyond the user experience of driving the car, for the most part, right? Like obviously it goes super fast too, which is, some could argue it's just the user experience. At the end of the day, you probably get from A to B at the same speed, pending you're not actually speeding in that really fast car. So user experience is what really differentiates that from a consumer perspective. And so, who makes the consumer experience? Well, it's typically the product manager, it's typically the designers, it's typically the engineers. And so playing a really strong, definitive role in that realm as a product manager is A, like super valuable to the business, but also B, just like a really good skill set to have as a product manager.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then how do you build on that? Do you just like use a bunch of products? But how do you build that skill on being able to identify a good user experience? Are there ways that you've seen yourself or other people just build on that over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I chatted to a lot of people about this in the past. It's something that I've kind of been noodling on for a while. The best advice I could give is really just to, A, look around you at all times. I'm, constantly looking around me and saying like, oh, that was poorly designed. Like, why was it? And then asking the question, why, right? This is the important part, not just identify that it's poorly designed, but also ask like, why was it poorly designed? What did they do that makes this like unusable or like confusing? And there's so many examples on a day-to-day basis. I just came back from Europe and for like a month on vacation, and man, like that, living in a foreign country, you just notice the usability problems like left, right, and center because you're not like familiar with a lot of things. So it's even more unfamiliar and confusing. So that's just one thing. Just keep your eyes open, look around. If you want to be more like regimented about it, one thing that I used to do pretty heavily, I don't do as much anymore, but I did do a lot several years ago, is I go to Product Hunt, kind of build a habit of like every day going through like the top 5 products on that list, and hopefully being able to get into them. So like download the app, get the free trial into the SaaS software, whatever it is, and just go through the onboarding flow, play around with the experience, see what it is, and then try to like kind of understand like, is this good or is this bad? And try to weigh those consequences. And then, if you really want to get dramatic about it, I had someone who I was working with at one point who was trying to get into product management. He did this. He went to Product Hunt for the next week. He grabbed screenshots of every single product that he like found interesting, and he put it all into like a Figma or like a sketch file on his computer. And then he came back and we went through them all together, and we talked about like what was bad and what was good about each of them, like page by page, screen by screen. That's honestly like, if you're not working with user experience designers on a regular basis, that's probably like the level of work you need to do to like start to build like a sense for good user experience. And then there's also, there's like the typical Dan Norman books, The Design of Everyday Things. I think everyone who's looked at this will probably know that that's a book to read. And he's got a bunch of, or 2 or 3 other ones that are also a good read. And that will give you just basically the terminology and the verbiage of good user experience. But actually doing the work, spending time, treating it as a practice and a skill set you're trying to develop is really how you're going to make that happen.
Cool, awesome. And what would you say is, so last couple questions before we go into the networking portion of the event. What would you say is your favorite product with a great user experience?
Sorry, sorry, I missed that.
What's your
I was reading the comments.
Yeah, no worries. What's your favorite product that you feel has like great user experience that you would like to talk about? I know you mentioned the Tesla. Any others that pop up in your mind that you feel have great experience?
Oof, so many. I actually don't own a Tesla, so I can't speak to its user experience. I only hear about it through reviews and friends who own them. But what's my favorite thing? I think like right now, I've been actually spending a lot of time looking at the user experience of espresso machines, which is an interesting thing. Like there's so many different configurations of them, and so many different ways that people try to do the exact same problem, which is to make an espresso. So that's super interesting to me. But if I were to say like, what's the one product that I would use routinely that I like think is just like built really well, I'd say like AirPods, honestly. It's just like simple. They typically do exactly what I want them to do. They like work really well into my lifestyle. I can use them in multiple different scenarios super easily. So yeah, and the integration into my phone is just like amazing. So that's just a great example of like doing one problem really well.
Yeah, amazing set of products. Very curious about the espresso machine. I do have one more question, and then we'll open it up for anyone else who has the question. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat so that Sam can answer your question. So last one is about reflecting on your entire career. So like you mentioned, you've done amazing products. You built amazing products from the Mario, the North Focus, and now working on Google AR products. What would you see at the top 3 influential like moments that you feel has impacted your career growth? So the 3 main learnings that you've taken from one journey to another journey that showcases your learning and has impacted your growth, and you feel like you're in a much better place as a product manager that you can share with the group.
Yeah. Okay. So there's, I'll kind of walk you through each of the phases of my career. So like, let's say the first one being my own business, working on a small business, trying to ship a hardware device myself with a couple other people. I'd say like coming out of that, I understood and I learned very acutely, because we ran out of money and went into debt trying to get that thing off the ground. As you may well understand from me working on your own business, is understanding your customer, number one. Like, it sounds cliche, I know, but I mean, talking to your customer is a good one. Like starting with that, right? At that business, we talked to them too late, and we therefore ran out of time to make good decisions to get a product out the door that would actually solve their problems in a meaningful way. So that's probably number one moment. Number two moment was the launch of like Focals V1 at North. I think for me, what I had learned through that whole process, right, that was like a 5-year build-up and then like a launch, was that you can build an amazing, complex technological device that has all the greatest and latest technology and being like the absolute bleeding edge. But if you're not able to sell it well, right, and get to your customers, it's going to be really hard to make a good business out of it. So that's number two. And then number three, as a general product manager, I've been going through like coaching on career stuff in the last year or so since joining Google. And like I said, go through the values exercise if you can, like super encourage people to do that. But I think it's just, being inside of a business like Google and being at Google with the reputation that it has for obviously hiring the best and the brightest. I've worked, again, small business, me and a couple of friends, North and Thom, like high growth business, but still a startup in many ways. And now Google, like there's smart people everywhere, and just making sure that you're not, thinking that you're too smart, but also giving yourself credit for being smart enough is, I think, just something to keep in mind, and don't put too much stress and anxiety around like, should I be here, or am I too smart to be here? That kind of stuff. Just accept that in the world of technology, especially, there's just a lot of smart people, and you're probably one of them as well. And so just getting down and making sure that you're focusing on building skills that are actually helpful and developing who you are as a person. That's how you're going to get ahead and make progress.
Awesome, very impactful. Thank you so much. So now 2 questions quickly before we hop into the networking portion of the event. So one from our amazing buddy Jose. How do you keep focus and avoid your team falling into feature creep, especially with inputs from many stakeholders? How do you figure that out? Does that happen at Google, or if that's happened in the past?
I think Google is the definition of many stakeholders. I would say that the biggest thing is basically, one suggestion I would have is Shape Up. It gives you a really good framework and mental model for trying to be very pragmatic about how you approach every sprint, with all your stakeholders included. So there's definitely some really good best practices in there that will help you with that. I think second is I don't know. I mean, like there's so much complexity to this. I think that generally I would say like having a really strong opinion, loosely held as you go into these conversations, making sure that you understand like where you could be wrong, but also making sure that you state your opinion and state it clearly. That's all I really got for you on that one, Jose.
Awesome.
Sorry, actually, I'll say one more thing. Actually, I mean, and Jose will likely know this, but like. In any business, but especially businesses outside of the scale of somewhere like Google or like the big companies that have like very strong product market fit, time is your most valuable resource as a business, right? And time is typically a function of the money you have as a business available to you and the amount of people that you have on your team. So how you use your time is basically the most important thing you can focus on as a product manager or a leader in a business. And so being extremely, extremely ruthless about how you spend your time, not personally, I'm not talking about productivity wise, like me answering 5 emails versus 10 emails a day. I'm thinking about me working with my team and planning what we're working on every sprint. You cannot let a sprint go by that you're not working on the most important things, like full stop, period, end of story. If you are, or if you're not prepared for a sprint and you just kind of walk into it and, okay, well, we'll get to that next sprint. You're wasting time. Call the meeting again tomorrow and do it again when you are ready. It's too easy for people to kind of just keep going and work through and not be really, really ruthless about every time you have a conversation about prioritization, like what are you actually going to work on? So just like spend the time, get it right, focus on that.
So this is super helpful. Very incredible stuff. I really like how you define the whole, time with people. Even just like for me, I'm writing notes down. Last question from Maggie. How does your team approach generative research from like AR apps, from augmented reality apps? How do you do the generative research? If you can share.
I'm assuming, Maggie, you kind of mean like foundational research, like things where you're asking people like open-ended questions. Is that kind of what you're referring to versus like evaluative research? If so, yeah. So I mean, we approach it differently depending on how what each project's needs are. So, okay, yeah. So so we would refer to that, Maggie, as like foundational stuff. So instead of coming to a customer with a solution, we come to the customer with a question, and they help us understand the solution. That's kind of how we see like generative, or what we call foundational research. And honestly, I would say that there's like a bunch of different methods you can do. One of the ones that like I've recently used, which has been really interesting and fun, has been doing like co-design exercises. So bringing people in and actually having them design the product with you. And so again, going back to my previous point, like earlier on around being really clear about what the right questions are to ask. You need to be really clear about what the right questions are you're going to ask, because they're going to help you design the product. But if you can get that right, you'll see some really interesting results. You'll see like very clearly stated user preferences, what they need, what they don't need, that kind of thing. And instead of doing all this work to develop the product and then bring it to them and say, how do you like it? Starting with something like that really helps you understand like where you need to work on, where you need to play in order to like solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Maggie.
I hope that answers your question, Maggie. But that was very useful and very helpful. So thank you so much. So thank you, Sam. I think you've left us with like huge wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for sharing a lot of those things. We'll definitely be doing a blog post on this entire talk actually, because lots of nuggets and gems in there. So thank you so much. So now we'll be moving on to the networking portion of the event. So if you're interested in that, feel free to like stay behind. I'm going to open about 3 to 5 breakout rooms and put a bunch of people in there for you to like ask each other questions. Some you're welcome to stay if you like to, have conversations with other people. It will be for around 10 minutes or so. So you get the opportunity to meet other people, share your LinkedIn, all of that good stuff. Otherwise, feel free to leave, go back to what you're doing. Thank you so much for taking time to join us and learn with us. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, everyone. And thank you so much, Sam. We really do appreciate you. And then, yes, we'll be sending out all of the recording insights and all that in a blog post very soon. So yeah, I'm going to stop recording now, and then I'm going to open up the breakout rooms.